And Geoff Rohoman, of course, just heard him on the update. He joins us now as well. As that was quite the reception. Geoff, thanks for joining us. Quite the reception. No surprise that GSP got from the hometown crowd. And boy, you talk about hometown advantage. I don't know if that's intimidating for Carlos Condit, but if anyone ever had one, it's certainly Georges St-Pierre.
Now, hey, Norm, yeah, to be honest with you, I have no idea what you just said to me, because this place just exploded with Georges St-Pierre coming out right now for the first time in 18 months. This place, I'm just going to let you listen, Norm, right now. I'm just going to let you listen.
Okay.
This place has come unglued. George looks great. He looks to be in just phenomenal shape. He looked great at the weigh-in yesterday, and he looks like he's bulked up a little bit in that time off. So, you know, I think that you asked about the hometown advantage, and like you just heard, the crowd is definitely behind him. And Carlos Condit had his game face on. He looked motivated. He looks like he's ready to shock the world, but Canada's riding a little bit of an unlucky streak here at this show, with Hominick and Bocek both losing, and Francois Carmon picking up a decision he probably didn't deserve. So Georges St-Pierre's got the weight of Canada on his shoulders as far as the mixed martial arts community, and he's looking to solidify himself as that best welterweight champion in the history of this sport, and move on to a May fight potentially against Anderson Silva as he steps right into the cage right now.
All right, Geoff, can you hear me now? Okay. Hey, Geoff, if you can hear me, I was going to just ask you, in terms of style, what are we about to see in the ring between these two fighters?
Yeah, didn't catch that again, Norm, but Georges St-Pierre's doing his usual workout routine. He did a cartwheel in there. Carlos Condit is not taking his eyes off of St-Pierre right now. St-Pierre doing his usual pacing, getting a little bit loose, but Carlos Condit is not taking his eyes off him, and they just show on the big screen. They show Anderson Silva standing up and cheering for Georges St-Pierre. We spoke to Anderson Silva before the show, and he said, the next fight for him that makes the most sense is against Georges St-Pierre at a catch weight of 177 pounds, which would be probably the biggest fight in the history of the sport. We talk about, fantasy matchups in boxing between guys like Mike Tyson and Muhammad Ali. Anderson Silva and Georges St-Pierre are two of the potentially best fighters in the history of mixed martial arts, and we might actually get to see them fight each other in their prime, which is a really, really exciting thing to do. This fight is just about getting underway, so the crowd's dying down, so I might actually be able to hear you, Norm.
Okay, great. So quickly, I'll slip it in before the crowd gets going again. In terms of style of St-Pierre and Condit, how are their styles different?
Yeah, no, the crowd's fired up again, Norm, as Bruce Buffer just makes Georges St-Pierre's announcement right now to introduce him as the defending welterweight champion, even though George sort of claims that Carlos Condit's the champ. George doesn't feel as he's the champ still, since he was announced for so long. GSP chant breaks out right now, and Carlos Condit's going to get a ton of boos when Bruce Buffer finally announces him.
All right. I'll just try one more to see if I can slip that question by Geoff, if you can hear me. In terms of style of fighting with Georges St-Pierre and Carlos Condit, how are their styles different?
I think you asked about the differences between the two fighters.
That's right.
I'm not sure, to be perfectly honest with you, but Carlos Condit is going to come out and try and knock out Georges St-Pierre. On paper, Georges St-Pierre is probably going to want to take this fight down and use his wrestling, which he has superior wrestling to Carlos Condit, but Georges St-Pierre is the master game plan and the master strategist, and he might want to try and stand with Carlos Condit, because that's probably not what Carlos Condit is going to expect. Everyone expected Georges St-Pierre to take Josh Koscheck down in their fight, and Georges St-Pierre stood and traded with him because, he said, Josh Koscheck is expecting me to take him down. I'm going to throw him off this game plan. And that might be what we see right now. Now, the problem is with George's knee, he's going to shoot in for that first takedown, and if he doesn't get that, he might get some doubts in his head about his knee holding up and staying strong, and that's where Carlos Condit might capitalize. And if I'm Carlos Condit looking to shock the world, I'm testing that knee right away. I'm throwing 3 or 4 leg kicks right away at George's knee to see if it's going to hold up.
Geoff, if you can hear me as well, I'd be curious to know what kind of prices scalpers were getting for this event, especially right near the cage.
Norm, to be honest with you, this is electric. I've never experienced something like this before, Norm, with just the sheer passion of the fans. Georges St-Pierre is such a beloved son of Canada, and especially fighting in his hometown of Montreal, Canada. Carlos Condit just got introduced. He's getting booed. Bruce Buffer right now, he's introducing Georges St-Pierre. I'll let you guys take a listen.
Sure.
This place is unbelievable, Norm. They're just about ready to touch gloves and get their instructions here. This fight is just about ready to get underway, and that's what we've all been waiting for.
All right. Can you hear me now, Geoff?
I can barely hear you, Norm, but I can sort of.
Okay. Scalpers, how much were they getting for tickets? Did you hear?
I don't know how much they were getting for tickets, but I'm looking around the arena right now, and there are a few empty seats, but for the most part, it looks pretty filled. So George St. Pierre, Dana White maintains that he's the top draw in the UFC right now, and it looks that way. The question is, I don't know if I told you this yet or not, they're coming back to Montreal in May. May is going to be Montreal's month, so that's a quick turnaround. They're going to have to put together a big-time show in order to sell out this Bell Center again, but the Olay chants start right now, and this fight is underway with George St. Pierre stalking Carlos Condit early.
Okay. Geoff, if you can still hear me, I'm sure the volume's going to increase as they are underway. But which other fights, from your perspective, stood out for you as the best one or best ones so far?
I mean, Johnny Hendricks looked great against Martin Kampmann. He knocked him out in 46 seconds, and Johnny Hendricks is, without question, the number one contender now in the 170-pound division. I don't know if he's earned a title fight by knocking out Kampmann. He's knocked out Fitch and beat Koscheck as well. But the problem is, if George wins, George is going to fight Anderson, and that means that Johnny Hendricks will have to wait almost a year in order to fight George St. Pierre for that title, so he might have to take a tune-up fight. The best-case scenario for Johnny Hendricks is if Carlos Condit wins, then he gets that title shot right away. But, Mark Hominick, it's a really sad story. That's his fourth loss in a row. He'll probably be cut by the UFC, and it's really sad because Hominick is one of the nicest guys I've ever encountered in the world of mixed martial arts. I thought that Tom Lawler looked really good. I thought that John McDessie looked really good. And the Canadians, I think they're 2-3 so far, so we can go 500 if George St. Pierre is able to pull off the win against Carlos Condit.
Okay, you're listening to our own Geoff Rohoman, who is ringside or cage side at UFC 154 in Montreal at the Bell Center. And fight just underway with Carlos Condit and Georges St. Pierre. Geoff, if in fact you can still hear me now as the volume increases there with the crowd at the Bell Center, I was going to ask you, albeit in a different weight category, if Georges St. Pierre is the very best in UFC, how would you compare, although he's a different weight class, how do you compare GSP and John Jones?
It's really tough to compare pound for pound. I think that George St. Pierre probably, if he was at 205, I don't know if he would have the striking that John Jones has, but I think he has better wrestling. I don't know if you heard the crowd explode, but George St. Pierre just got a takedown. He's hit Carlos Condit's guard, just looking to pass it, and he's raining down some punches on Carlos Condit. So the crowd is really loving this. George St. Pierre, he stood and traded with them for the first little bit. Caught Condit with a couple of good punches. George is now in half guard, trying to work his way and impose his will on Carlos Condit as he lands a few punches here. It's really interesting to compare the fighters. I think the catch weight that they're going to do with Anderson and George is going to be 170. So Anderson's going to move down about 7 pounds from his 185-pound championship limit. And George is going to have to bulk up a little bit and move up to 170. But it's an interesting fight. I mean, you can't really compare George and Anderson Silva because George is a veteran, George and John Jones, because John Jones is so new on the scene. He's only had a couple of years' experience in mixed martial arts. But it's always a fun debate when you say, if this guy was this big and if this guy was this small, who would win in a fight? But I think in my heart, I think Anderson Silva is probably pound for pound number one. John Jones is number two, and I think George St. Pierre is number three, as blasphemous as that might be.
Wow. Well, Geoff Rohoman, who's right there front and center beside the cage in Montreal, the Bell Center for UFC 154, as we're a few minutes into the start of the fight of Georges St. Pierre, the welterweights, Georges St. Pierre and Carlos Condit. So in terms of Condit, I heard him described by some of the analysts on the pay-per-view as, and they meant it as a compliment, as a born killer, so to speak. I take it Georges St. Pierre, if Condit's a born killer, then Georges St. Pierre must be the ultimate.
Yeah, that's funny. I mean, Carlos Condit got that nickname when he was in the WEC, which was sort of a feeder system for the UFC because he was just knocking out guys left, right, and central. And he's done the same in the UFC. His only loss was to Martin Kampmann in his UFC career. He has a win over Rory McDonald, who I think is the prospect of the 170-pound division. And Connor looks good from his guard. He's got an active guard. He's landing some punches on George from his guard. And his legs are coming up around George's shoulders. He's looking to try and grab a triangle choke or some sort of submission, get back on his feet. But George is so strong, Norm. He's just so strong. He's able to hold guys down. And he's landing some solid punches as this crowd really explodes. We've got 15 seconds left in this first round, which will easily go to George St. Pierre. If this is the way the fight keeps going, George St. Pierre is easily on his way to a win. And he's actually a very convincing win right now. Carlos Condit gets up to his feet, but the round's about to come to a close. And there it is right there. Carlos Condit bleeding above his right eye. Oh, it's a lot of blood, actually, Norm. Carlos Condit's bleeding very heavily from an elbow that George St. Pierre landed, and as you can hear, George St. Pierre takes that round. The crowd goes crazy.
Yeah, by the way, how many points does Georges St. Pierre get for keeping Condit on the ground for most of that first round as he did?
I mean, we've talked about George St. Pierre and how sort of fans think that he might be boring because he's wrestling, but that wasn't a boring round at all. He wasn't lying on Carlos Condit by any means. He was actively working. He was trying to advance position. He was trying to get into half guard and even into a mount. He was raining down punches and elbows, and if you look at Carlos Condit's head, it shows that he was landing some elbows here. They just showed an elbow on the replay. It's just one that cut Condit just above his right eye. Doesn't look like the blood will trickle into his eye, so it shouldn't affect him too badly, but a couple more of those elbows, and that sucker's going to be bleeding pretty good. Geoff
Rohoman is ringside or cage side at UFC 154 in Montreal. Geoff, some of the earlier fights, I heard the fans, kind of like in Toronto, they were booing because guys weren't they were fighting. They weren't taking each other's heads off. I couldn't believe it.
Yeah, it's so tough. I don't like when people boo any sort of fight because you're sitting in the audience. If you're going to boo, I'd like to see you get in the cage, and see if you can do what these guys do. Go take a couple of punches from guys who have trained 20 years on how to throw a proper punch. I don't like booing, but you gotta. Dana White always says you got to give the fans what they want. He wants exciting fights. He wants people to be entertained, and unfortunately, a grappling match is probably not going to entertain the casual fan. George St. Pierre coming out for the second round. He's taking the Octagon. He's throwing some jabs at Carlos Condit. He's trying to open up that cut a little bit more. Carlos Condit looks a little tentative. Throws a head kick, but George St. Pierre shrugs that off. I don't like the booing. I think that all fights are exciting, and I think that if you're educated enough, you'll find the art of grappling and the art of jiu-jitsu a beautiful thing. The problem is that some of the casual fans are looking for those big-time knockouts, and when they don't get it, they get frustrated.
Yeah, I think they need to learn a little bit more about the fight game. On that note, Geoff, we're going to go to the update, but we'll look forward to having you on later in the show. Thanks for making time for us, Geoff. Doing a great job.
Okay, thanks a lot, Norm. Sorry I couldn't hear you very well, bud.